Hello everyone. Cognitive awakening is one of the first and most important major plot seeds to be planted in Azur Lane's story, looming over us since all the way back in Divergent Chessboard, and is the main goal of our current main antagonists. Over the years we've been occasionally drip-fed little bits of information on what it could be, right up until Light of the Martyrium earlier this year where they slapped us in the face with a partial awakening out of nowhere. So let's gather those drips and try to piece together what this awakening could be. As mentioned, the first hint at anything awakening related was Divergent Chessboard, Chapter 9, where Tessa observes an awakening response within the pawns on White's side of the field. She personally goes to ascertain the gap in potential, and at the end of the event has her vessel overcome by the pawns, believing repeating the war will eventually yield the desired result. The next appearance is in the following event, funnily enough, with the Shokaku pawn in Visitors Died in Red, Chapter 15. When Kaga is going to attack Zuikaku, the pawn defies her and steps in to block her attack. Kaga theorizes that this was brought on by remembering something important from the depths of its mind. The logs state that the pawn resisted attempts at control and unleashed its latent power, but the siren questions whether this could be categorized as true awakening as it does not meet pre-existing conditions. Fallen Wings doesn't mention awakening, but we do get to see Oust giving Observer Zero the order to do the whole genocide to forced evolution thing that later events confirm the end result would be awakening. Winter's Crown also has Purify name dropped at the end, but doesn't really relate to much of anything. Scherzo of Iron and Blood is the first big one for the concept. When Bismarck is cornered by the Royal Navy, Testa arrives and activates an awakening protocol, forcing a black cube's power onto Bismarck. She attempts to self-destruct, forcefully ejecting herself from the protocol. But the real gold amongst this is what Observer says to Bismarck as she's sinking. If you are able to transcend your limitations as Bismarck and become one with your alter ego, perhaps then you may find your answer. For a while things dry up a bit. Skybound Oratory mentions cognitive chips in Chapter 11, but that's some translation screw-up on JP's part that gets brought over to EN. Testa initially believed Shinano underwent something similar, but due to not meeting the commander and the general differences believes it to be something else, or a computational error. Gorovod of Dawn's Reign does have a little something in Chapter 29 though, where Anzil and Aus converse over the former having something of a breakthrough in her research. It's not really much, just confirming that Anzil has been working on this for a long time before the Alpha timelines fall, but it does give us one important little detail. The answer lies in someone with high enough attunement to the Wisdom Cubes, aka the Commander. The Soviets pull through again in Abyssal Refrain, also in Chapter 29, where Kronstadt sees Aus talking to Zero in his lab, confirming that what Anzil sees in the Kanzen and her gushing has biased him towards them, and he too is curious about this awakening thing. Also the message from Anzil and her assistant that becomes the Commander, for when they're awakened, or on the verge of meta. Snow Realm is another sizable one, though it's not immediately apparent. First things first, we have Parmayat meta connecting to what she calls the Essence, which is later implied by Parmayat as well as the Commander and Soyuz to be fragments preserving information at the cube's inception. The second is the Parmayat that the Commander and Soyuz meet in the Wisdom Cube information space, essentially being the concept of Parmayat, all versions rolled into one, likely the culmination of these fragments. Our final stop, Light of the Martyrium, has a couple big reveals for Awakening. First is the elaboration on Fragment, from a memory of Oust. Every time a shipgirl dies, a little more information is added to their names, and the collective countless fragments that makes up their names. Death is not a one-way street for them. Then, of course, is the main event itself. When faced with an X incursion in the memory space, and given a foundation that conforms to his will, the Commander is able to merge his fleet still fighting in the Martyrium with the one in the memory space, temporarily giving them the strength to defeat the X and Death's Shadow. So that's all the pieces we currently have. Let's try putting them together, albeit with a healthy dose of speculation. The most important piece is what Observer says to Bismarck back in Scherzo: transcend your limitations as Bismarck and become one with your alter ego. Between that and Martyrium, it seems pretty clear it involves some form of merging. But what is the alter ego in this case? The first thing that springs to mind is their meta counterparts, and perhaps that's what the Sirens were trying to do with Biz. Make her become a meta and then somehow combine Biz meta with her regular self, keeping her mind intact and awakening to strength beyond meta. Kinda like what was going on in the original anime. I haven't actually watched it in a bit. But I don't necessarily think that's all there is to it. I think the alter ego in this case isn't just metas, but rather all of them. I don't think it's a coincidence that we're introduced to shipgirls adding more to the fragments each time they die, and seeing a partial awakening in the same event. Those fragments, or the essence, are essentially the concept of a particular shipgirl, like what we saw with Parmia at the end of Snowrun. To use Enterprise as a stand-in, she somehow undergoes awakening, merging with every Enterprise who has ever died, becoming one with the very concept of herself, becoming Enterprise in the truest sense, gaining a sort of enlightenment through the data and emotions of all the other Enterprises, and great strength through it. The other big question is, how? How do you trigger the awakening, and how do you make it a full, permanent thing instead of a temporary buff like in Martyrium? I think the latter is already answered with what I've just posited. In Martyrium, the fleet merges with their counterparts from a memory space. When that space crumbles afterwards, it would make sense that the power would fade along with it. By merging with something more permanent, it makes sense that the awakening would be too. As for triggering it, that's a little more complicated. It seems something the commander can likely just do, thanks in part to its exceptionally high cube affinity. Especially now he consciously knows about it. All he needs is a counterpart for a ship to merge with, and a space that completely conforms to his will. Not exactly something you can just pick up from a local shop, but they aren't impossible prerequisites. But that's just a partial thing, we need the whole shebang, which is a slight more difficult. The fragments are inside the Wisdom Cube information network, it's just a case of finding them and superimposing them onto our girls in reality. And that's where the commander comes in, since he's the one who most consistently connects to the network. Although that's with the caveat that he currently doesn't get a say in when that happens. He'd probably also need to be conscious to do it, which so far he's very not when the connection happens. Best case scenario, he passes out, but he's also been known to just disappear from the world for a bit. So you need to figure out how to consciously connect to the network, find the various essences, and create a space that allows him to merge the content with it, like a reversed full scales. And then you'd have to do it for a fleet of potentially thousands. Fun times. But that's my theory. Of course, there's still quite a lot of unknowns that could reinforce or disprove it, as we learn more, and there's a few outliers. Like research ships. Are they the same ones in every timeline that have a pool of essence to awaken from? Or do they just get cucked? Monarch's already not doing so hot, I'd imagine she'd be worse if she got eclipsed by her sisters. Bornholm Richard too, since she can't have a pool of essence given that she can't be recreated and hasn't died in the first place. Probably. Though given the state she's in, she might not need it if she keeps her powers. Also there's the stuff with the pawns. Probably just an in-universe proof of concept in Divergent Chessboard, given it refuses to fit nicely in the timeline, and narratively it's just to plant the seeds, I think. But what do you all think? If you've got your own theories, leave them below, or just poke holes in mine if you want. But until next time, fair winds and following seas.